Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we are looking at a potential geopolitical shift that could have big implications for the US-Ukraine and maybe even your phone. It all comes down to a proposed deal for access to some very valuable minerals, plus a whole lot of money and some power plays. Ready to jump in?
Absolutely. It's a fascinating story with a lot of different moving pieces.
Let's start with just the basics.
Okay, so Ukraine offered the U.S. president a deal, continued American military aid, in exchange for giving the U.S. the right to develop Ukraine's rare earth mineral deposits.
Okay, so kind of like a quid pro quo, but why should we care about this? What makes this so significant?
Well, for starters, it could completely reshape global power dynamics, especially with the whole conflict between Russia and Ukraine going on. And then on top of that, these rare earth elements are really important. They're essential in so many technologies that we use every day.
I think you are going to have to break that down for me a little bit. What exactly are rare earth elements, and why are they so important?
Sure, so rare earth elements are a group of 17 metals. And they're critical for manufacturing pretty much everything, from smartphones to hard drives to electric vehicles to wind turbines. They're kind of like the unsung heroes of the tech world. But the problem is that the supply chain for them is super concentrated.
Meaning that there's just one place that controls most of the supply.
Exactly.
So who controls these materials?
Right now, China dominates the global rare earth market. And that's why the US and Europe are trying to find other sources and reduce their reliance on China.
Okay, so that's where Ukraine comes in.
Exactly. Ukraine has huge deposits of rare earth minerals, along with lithium, titanium, and other valuable resources. In fact, the European Commission said that Ukraine could be a supplier of over 20 critical raw materials.
Wow. So Ukraine could really become a major player in this whole market for these materials.
Oh, absolutely. But there are some big obstacles in the way. The biggest is the ongoing conflict with Russia. That creates a lot of uncertainty and risk for anybody that wants to invest in Ukraine. And then on top of that, Ukraine doesn't have all the technical expertise that they need to really develop these resources fully.
So it sounds like we are talking about a lot more than just money and resources here. This is about strategic alliances and global power.
Exactly.
So where does the U.S. president fit into all of this?
Well, he has said publicly that he's interested in this deal. He keeps saying that he wants to see a return on the U.S. investment in Ukraine. He says the U.S. has put between $300 and $350 billion into Ukraine, while Europe has only given about $100 billion.
Sounds like he's taking a pretty hard line, wants to see a more transactional relationship with Ukraine.
Yeah, and he's also been criticizing previous administrations. He says that they should have gotten a better return on their investment. He thinks that Ukraine's natural resources are worth around $500 billion, which he says could easily offset all the spending that the U.S. has done.
So basically he's saying, let's make this worth our while.
Yeah, that seems to be his position. But not everyone agrees with this approach. Some analysts think that this focus on getting money back from Ukraine signals a shift away from direct military support. And they're worried that that could weaken NATO's position and even embolden Russia.
So this deal could have some pretty big ripple effects, far beyond Ukraine.
Absolutely. And some analysts are even saying that his stance toward the EU and his trying to make this deal with Ukraine could backfire. They think it might actually push Europe closer to China and Russia.
So there are a lot of potential consequences here. For Ukraine, for the U.S., for global power in general.
Exactly. This whole deal raises a ton of questions, like what would the actual terms be? What impact would it have on the fighting between Ukraine and Russia? How would it change the U.S. relationship with Europe? How would it change the U.S. relationship with China?
It feels like we are just at the beginning of this whole thing. What should we be watching for as this develops?
I think one of the most important things to pay attention to is how this might impact the global rare earth market. Could this actually give the U.S. the power to break China's control? Or could this actually lead to like a resource war with countries scrambling to get their hands on these materials?
That's a really interesting question. What would even a successful deal look like?
That's a really tough question because there are so many different interests here. A good deal would have to address not just the immediate needs, like resources and aid, but also the long-term stability of the whole region and the global balance of power.
Sounds incredibly complicated.
It is, and we also have to think about unintended consequences. Any big move like this is going to have ripple effects that are hard to predict, especially in such a tense region.
So why should our listeners care about this potential deal between the U.S. and Ukraine over these minerals?
Because this isn't just some abstract geopolitical thing. This could actually affect your daily life. We talked about all those technologies: smartphones, electric cars, renewable energy. How much those things cost and whether we can even get them all depends on the supply of rare earth minerals.
So if this deal happens and the U.S. can get more of these resources, could we see some big changes in the tech world?
It's definitely possible. More supply could mean lower prices, which would make all those technologies more affordable. It could also lead to more innovation and maybe even the development of totally new technologies.
But if the deal falls apart, or if it makes things less stable, could we see the opposite happen?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Problems in the supply chain could cause prices to go way up. And that could really slow down how quickly new technologies are made. It all just shows how connected the world is. Something that happens thousands of miles away can affect us all.
So we could be looking at some major economic and technological changes. It makes you wonder who really benefits from this deal and who stands to lose the most.
That's a really important question. And there's not an easy answer. You've got the US, Ukraine, Russia, China, Europe, the whole global tech industry. And in the end, consumers like you, it's this delicate balancing act. And whatever happens is going to have a big impact on everyone.
It's like everyone is playing poker with really high stakes. You never know who's bluffing and who has the best hand.
It really is.
It definitely gives you a lot to think about.
It does. This is one of those situations where we all need to stay informed and pay attention to what's happening and think critically about all the information that's out there. There's a lot at stake here, maybe more than we realize.
For sure. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. It's been great talking about this with you. This is a really complex situation, you know? It raises a question for me. What would a successful deal even look like? What could happen that we aren't even thinking about?
That's the big question, isn't it? Like, it feels like we're trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces keep moving. We're talking economics and politics and the possibility that something could go wrong that no one expects.
That's exactly it. It's not just about getting the deal done. It's about figuring out what everyone wants and what the problems could be and how power shifts when you do something like this.
And we can't forget about the people involved. There are real people living in Ukraine whose lives are affected by this. What they think and what happens to them matters.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the big picture and forget that this is about people's lives. We need to remember that this isn't just about resources and money. It's about people and how they live.
So how do we even start to figure this out? What are the important things we need to think about with this deal?
I think the first thing is to look at money. The president has said he wants to get something back. He thinks that Ukraine's resources could be valuable to the U.S., maybe even make up for all the money they've given in aid.
But is it that simple? I mean, getting these minerals out of the ground and making them usable is hard and expensive. Plus, there's the environment and needing to build new things and needing people who know how to do all this. It's not like you just dig a hole and the minerals are ready to go.
You're right. It's a long-term thing that takes a lot of planning. And even if you do everything right, it might not work. The market for these minerals changes all the time, and China still controls a lot of it. The U.S. might put a lot of money into this, and then the price drops or China starts selling them really cheap.
So it's a risk with a potentially big payoff, but it could also fail. And then there's how Russia will react. They are watching this closely, and they probably won't be happy if the U.S. gets closer to Ukraine.
Exactly. If the U.S. tries to control these resources in Ukraine, Russia's going to push back. And that could make the fighting worse, maybe even pull in NATO and other countries.
So this could be really dangerous. One mistake could cause a lot of problems. It shows you that everything is connected. What happens in one place can affect the whole world.
It can. And that's why this is so complicated. We need to understand all the different parts of this problem. There are no easy solutions. This is something that takes time, and the risks are huge.
So for our listeners who might be a little lost, what's the main takeaway? What's the most important thing to remember as we watch this unfold?
The most important thing to remember is that this isn't just about minerals or global politics. It's about people. It's about the people in Ukraine who are stuck between these big, powerful countries. It's about the people who depend on technology that uses these minerals. And it's about all of us, because the outcome of this will affect us all no matter what happens.
That's a good point. We need to understand what people are going through and work towards solutions that are good for everyone. It's not going to be easy, but it's the right thing to do if we want a better future.
I agree with that. And we all have a part to play in making that future happen. By staying informed and talking about these things and making sure our leaders do what's right, we can help make decisions that are good for everyone.
That's right. This has been a really helpful conversation. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having this discussion.
And to our listeners, keep learning about this. There's lots of information online and in the news. Stay curious and ask questions.
The more you know, the better. And in a world that's so complicated, it's really important to understand what's happening.
I couldn't agree more. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into something important happening in the world. Until then, keep learning.
And stay informed.
It's crazy how these minerals most people don't even know exist can cause so much trouble.
Right? It just shows you how connected everything is. Decisions about these resources could affect markets and technology and even how countries get along with each other.
And it shows why it's important to understand what's going on and talk about it. We can't just ignore it and hope someone else fixes it. We all have a part to play.
I totally agree. We need to look deeper than just the headlines and really understand the issue. That's the only way we can make good decisions and make sure our leaders are doing the right thing.
So what can we do? How can we make a difference?
Well, the first thing is to learn more. Read articles from good sources, listen to podcasts like this one, talk to people who have different opinions. The more we know, the better we can speak up for solutions that help everyone.
And don't be afraid to talk to your elected officials. Let them know what you think. They need to hear from us, especially about important stuff like this.
Exactly. And support groups that are working to help Ukraine. There are a lot of organizations doing good work there, and they need our help.
This has been a really interesting deep dive. Thanks for explaining all this to us.
My pleasure. It's been great talking about this with you.
And to our listeners, keep learning and thinking about this and talking about it with each other. What happens next is up to all of us.
Well said. Let's work together to create a future that's fair and sustainable for everyone.
That's a great way to put it. That's all the time we have for today, but we'll be back next week with another deep dive into something important happening in the world. Until then, stay curious and stay engaged.
And remember, we are here to make things clear.
Subscribe to our podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.